Welcome to Never Too Late for Fitness Radio, bringing baby boomers proven strategies and innovative products for getting fit, staying fit, so you can live a longer, healthier, and happier life. Here's your host, best-selling author and fitness advocate, Phil Ferris.
This is Phil Ferris, and welcome to our show. Never Too Late for Fitness Radio provides answers and straight talk about fitness, nutrition, and healthy lifestyles for people over 50. During each show, we talk to real health and fitness experts solving real problems with proven solutions you can apply in your day-to-day life. Today's guest is Mari Swingle, PhD clinical psychologist with an MA in psychology, MA in education, and a BA in visual arts. She is the author of the book iMinds: How Cell Phones, Computers, Gaming, and Social Media Are Changing Our Brains, Our Behavior, and the Evolution of Our Species. She practices in Vancouver, Canada, and speaks regularly on the topic of health and happiness in the digital age. Dr. Mari Swingle is a 2015 winner of a Federation of Association of Brain and Behavioral Sciences, FABBS, Early Career Impact Award for her major research contributions in the sciences of mind, brain, and behavior, and increasing awareness of research through media and public outreach. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Mari.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, now your area of specialization in your book, iMinds, addresses how screen-based technology is impacting our brains and our health. Can you explain what that really means and the type of people that you work with?
Well, I work from anyone from 3 to 93, the whole gambit. And when we first started having queries about this, we were only looking at youth, only looking at the children. But very, very timely, this chat we're having today, it's affecting all of us. And there are certain niches or demographics of those over 50 who are also very, very much affected. And it's affecting our mental health and also our physical health. The physical health is really obvious. If we're sitting on our bottoms on our screens, we're not getting out and about. The mental health issue is a little bit more intertwined with so many other things. So I'd say, what do you want to know? Because I could chat about this for hours.
Well, let's start with how you got involved in this specific area, and what drove you to say, hey, there's a problem here. And that we didn't really know, most people weren't aware of it because they thought technology is great.
Yeah, well, it's two-pronged in that I was a practicing therapist, MA level, and finishing up my PhD and looking for a dissertation topic. And I was very, very intrigued with children, ADHD, and a little bit of the computer connection, and or the gaming connection at the time. And the other was, doing a bit of chest pounding. I had pretty good reputation of helping folks. And there was a subset of clients that all of a sudden weren't getting better with the quote-unquote usual treatment. They would come in for a cycle of treatment, and we'd see all the nice improvements that we wanted to see, and then within around 3 months, they'd regress back almost to zero. And then there was another group that just weren't shifting at all. So this was, more than just a bit of a research enigma. This was practical. Something was affecting a subset of clients. And then all the bells just went off. Massive epiphany. There was a connection. At that time, it was with young male children and excessive gaming. And it was kind of a no-brainer to pick this up for my dissertation. And the catch there, of course, is for IRB review. It's really, really hard to get permission with kids. So as much as I wanted to work with kids, the powers that be forced me to look at adults. And that was a real blessing in disguise. Because I got incredible pictures of what excessive usage looks on not just the developing brain or the munchkins, but on all of us. And to twist it even further, post my PhD, I realized I was sitting on over 20 years of data of how screen-based technology affects the brain. And that's a really rare opportunity. We have, a lot of data on television of communities with and without television, but we don't have, the true pre-post, or what I like to say, the pre and the during. And that's fascinating stuff to look at. The other one that's probably really interesting to your demographics, to your listeners, is the effects of not necessarily chronological age, but age of introduction, and how that affects each of us as well. And I guess if I had to just sum it up in one big phrase, it's not if we do or don't use the technology, it's how and why we use it, especially for those over 40.
Okay. Now, can you describe the specific manifestations that overuse of technology has, both mentally, physically, emotionally, on people?
Mm-hmm. Well, for those over 50, it's a general malaise. So it's just not feeling good, and you don't quite know why. If we start to look at this a little bit more clinically, if I had to, put a label on it, it would be an agitated depression. Meaning you're not moping around all sad. You're kind of, your mind is running around aimlessly without purpose. So there's this agitation. And it makes a lot of sense when we don't know what to do with ourselves and we're feeling kind of edgy, to go into a screen, and it immediately settles that emotion. We get kind of a pseudo purpose, whether we're, researching something or connecting with family and friends over Facebook. We have a sense of purpose, and the mind is occupied. And we get a little bit of fulfillment. Now, the catch-22 on this is the second we get off the screen, the shutter comes down. It's all gone. So all of those emotions that you were fighting, essentially the reason why you escaped to the screen in the first place, come back, and they actually come back stronger. So of course you want to go back on. And it's very, very different from any type of in-person contact. So, for example, if you go out for a glass of wine or coffee with your friends, you spend a good 2 hours together, and on your walk home or your drive home, you have a fulfillment. Whether it's the heart or the brain, just your being is fulfilled with a feeling of belonging and a feeling of friendship. You also tend to ruminate positively, not in a negative term, on the experience. You kind of giggle to yourself, and you look forward to the next meeting. When we do the same thing on the screen, so through any form of social media, and the culprit that we always go to just because it's the dominant one is Facebook, you get all of those feelings. And pardon the repetition, but I think it's really important to reinforce, is the second you close the screen, all of those feelings are gone, and in fact, you feel empty.
Can you drill down a little bit in terms of how those interactions on Facebook and other social media affect the brain and cause this reaction?
Well, it's the brain and the heart. There's a lot of stuff we don't quite understand that gets kind of thrown into woo-woo science just because we're not looking at it enough. But some of the things we do know, when we meet each other in person, the way our bodies start to mimic each other. A lot of social psychologists have been looking at this for decades. We cross our legs the same way. We lean in, we lean out, we mimic, we partake. To a certain extent, our heart rhythms start to match. There's even some interesting stuff on how our breathing rhythms start to match. We know that sneezes are contagious, but so is laughter. So there's a lot of this really, really subtle stuff of the human body that occurs in person that doesn't really occur through a screen. Laugh tracks on television. Why do they put a laugh track in? Because many of us would not spontaneously laugh as we would in the theater. to a screen. So on many, many levels, we know about this. We just haven't put a lot of further study into it in terms of, the negative effect now when we just focus on our screen. So that's kind of the level 1. The level 2 is the arousal template, which is anything we do on screen. First of all, the screens are flickering, and they're producing a lot of blue light. So if you're using a screen in the evening, you're not producing melatonin, and all of your systems are getting aroused, and the that again can start to promote an anxiety cycle. The other is pacing, which we know from a lot of gambling studies, and also what we call the varied reinforcement schedule, meaning you never quite know what you're going to get. You don't know whether the response is going to be positive or negative, whether the fellow on the dating site is going to look good or so-so, whether the dishwasher is going to be $10 more or less. So no matter what we're doing on the screen in these type of search modes, even on Facebook, you're scrolling to see what's happening with somebody or not. There's really, really interesting patterns of reward again, and it's just like in gambling. And when you stop that, you're left hanging there in many, many other activities. And given that you have an adult audience, I can talk about sex and exercise, meaning any type of activity with it where the brain and the body become aroused together, and then naturally just descend together. Those are very, very fulfilling activities. But the screen just essentially brings us up and leaves us there.
Okay, and I guess it's also because of the amount of information that we're processing, and so much of what is done online is meant to get an emotional response, to get you to click, to get you to follow,
Yep.
that our emotions are being bombarded with sensations of excitement of some sort. And that puts us in a heightened state of awareness of perhaps threat of some sort, which becomes very difficult to turn off.
Yeah, the body actually likes it. If we look at the higher arousal templates, in small doses, it's absolutely wonderful. It's exciting to go out and play a little gambling game, or even a game of cards for half an hour, an hour. It's how long you subject your body to it. An example I have in the book is that of old snail mail. When we're expecting a letter, and we know that the mail arrives at a certain time of day, we'll get pretty excited about that, whether it's a paycheck or a letter from grandma or whatever it was in the days when we still had regular snail mail. And we might run home from school or run home from work and check the mailbox. So you had this arousal going. But when you opened the box and the letter wasn't there, you kind of regulated your reactions. But nobody would sit at the mailbox overnight because you knew it was pointless. You would essentially amalgamate the disappointment and then go back the next day. So the brain would reset. The issue with screens is the brain never resets. We stay in these really, really high anticipations. And if your mailbox is empty, you'll go to the next mailbox. Many of us even develop multiple emails. Some of us, it's for work versus personal. And some of us, we pretend it's for all of that. It's just the opportunity to open other pages, or kids wanting to open all the little chocolate boxes on the advent calendar, all that type of stuff. The medium itself just reinforces the desire for more and more and more. We get these brain rewards from it. So that's what we're principally fighting here.
Okay. Now, to again narrow it down a little bit, can you talk about some specific issues that people over 40, 50 are experiencing because of their overuse of screen time?
Well, the number one is, the two big ones are anxiety and depression. A fascinating little twist to my earlier work is, around the turn of the century, anyone that, in the time we were talking about internet addiction, it was reversely related to age and education, meaning the younger you were and the more educated you were, the more likely you were to have an issue. It was also pretty gender boxed. We were talking about young males. And then when I started to really, really look at this, it would have been 2008, 2009, there were what we were calling then niche demographics. And one of the ones that I was very, very surprised to find were more mature, newly separated, or newly divorced females. Now, today it makes a lot of sense, but at the time we were going, what's going on? But if you look at this, these tended to be women who were going through empty nest and then had lost their partnership. And if anyone has been divorced, separated, or have witnessed friends go through this, you'd lose half of your social network. And the half that you don't lose becomes very awkward because they don't know whether to invite the person or their ex. So there's an isolation that occurs. And females tend to be, stereotypically much more social than men, meaning to have any sense of personal fulfillment or purpose, they need to be social. So again, at the time, this is just when social media was starting to get a really, really strong foot. So these were profiles of women that you'd see a lot on Facebook, a lot actually on gaming, believe it or not. They just weren't playing as 55-year-old females. They were having some fun with gender mixes and age, and of course, internet dating. But they were really, really going down the rabbit hole fast and feeling, initially very excited about it, and then, of course, tended to be affected with pretty substantial depression.
Are there specific elements or causes to that depression that came out of your research?
Well, as I was describing earlier, it's that we get a false sense of fulfillment. We get a false sense of community. But the second we're off, it's gone. And I'm talking about a very specific niche or demographic of middle-aged to more mature women. But anybody who's going through transition or any type of population that's feeling a little bit disenfranchised, those are the major risks, or were the major risks at the time. But these are issues of what we refer to as the digital immigrants, meaning individuals that were not born into technology, they migrated into it. And digital natives, or individuals who were introduced as very, very young children, the issues are very, very different. That's in terms of primary wiring. When we talk about older demographics, it's a rewiring, and arguably you can get it all back. When we're talking about children and how it affects social, emotional, and cognitive development, it's a totally different story. So if you're a parent of a youth or a grandparent, share the message.
No, I for children and grandchildren and nephews and nieces, a very important message, because the tablet became a digital babysitter. And be careful what you allow to influence your child, because you may get some unintended consequences.
To say the least. And if there's one thing the demographic over 50 can do is please, if you have good family relationships, get involved. One of the major issues of why it became a a digital babysitter is young families have lost all of their social and functional support. Meaning that the cost of daycare is absolutely outrageous. Most families, both parents are working. Many families are single parents. It filled a niche because parents are just too darn exhausted. They're absolutely fatigued. The distances that parents drive children for the quote-unquote play date because kids don't live in the same neighborhoods anymore. They're exhausted. So it's very, very natural to just throw the screens at the kids. So if you're in a position to act as a babysitter or a companion, a grandma or grandpa, a park attendant, what have you, that's probably the greatest gift you can give to your family and the community right now.
Because it does teach them how to interact and get that connection that you can only get when you're face-to-face with people. Yeah.
The other is wisdom. One of the big catches, you were talking about processing earlier. The catch with screens is we actually don't process. And we know that from early television. The reason for the success of ads on television is we actually don't process the information. And one of the key things, when things are just being bombarded at us, we just swallow it. We don't see patterns in things. We don't, amalgamate the information. And that's exactly how we acquire a certain form of intelligence that we call wisdom. And why do we use that term with more mature people? It's because you have to have witnessed enough information to see the patterns. And there's a lot of knowledge that elders have that is just not being transferred to the younger generation, whether it's through stories or sharing of experiences, or just being present enough that children witness different ways of doing things. The generational divides now are huge, and they're not. I wouldn't say they're, in past, sometimes they've been political, meaning, needs for certain change. And now they're more situational. It's a different world.
Okay. Well, if technology, on-screen technology is the problem, what's the cure?
Balance. Don't throw out your computers or your phones. Just ensure that they don't dominate you. A couple of phrases are, are you the master or the servant to your technology? If they're used as the magnificent tools that they're designed to be, they're fabulous. I mean, we're focusing on the negative because that's where we have to open our eyes. We've assimilated the technology without really looking at what it does. But if you look at what it does, what it can do, and you operate the screens and the technology with informed choice, then it's fabulous. So if you want to spend an hour on Facebook, please do. But also go for a walk in the park with your grandchild or a walk on the beach with your partner. If you do both of these things, then you're just an individual living in 2018, which makes a lot of sense. But if you're just kind of holed up in your home or condo or wherever you happen to live, interacting with the screen and doing naught else, that's where the harm really, really starts. And that's from, again, the wee ones to the elders. They reach out. One of the things we haven't talked about, I was talking about more mature, newly separated, divorced females is loneliness. When a retirement for many people, they see it as a great joy, and then when they're liberated of quote unquote purpose, they're liberated of purpose. And it might be fine to play golf every day for 6 months, but then what? Or if you're not affluent and that isn't a lifestyle you can afford, you get isolated pretty quickly. So that one of the number one draws again to the screens is loneliness. So reach out.
Okay.
To people.
let me drill down again a little bit more specifics. If because a lot of people can have issues with dependence or addiction to the screen and be in denial. What would be some of the specific behaviors or feelings or reactions that would indicate that, okay, maybe my balance is a little out of whack? Because everything I filter through is from my own self. So we're trying to give a perspective here that says, if you're experiencing these things, that might be a chance or an opportunity for you to step back and say, is that an indication that there is an imbalance?
Yeah, it's all we have to do is go right back to how we feel about all addictions, which is if you can't do without, if you're choosing screens over people, and if it's interfering with your social life, your family life, your scholastics, or your work. As simple as that. And if you start to feel agitated when you can't get on, or you're agitated when somebody requests that you get off, so for example, if you find a spouse irritating when they ask you to come help cut carrots, that's an indication. But the key here is that it's not like a classic addiction to whether we pick scotch or cocaine. It's more akin to an eating disorder. You have to eat. You have to learn to regulate the behavior, and the same thing is true in the modern world. If you want to participate in the modern world, you have to learn how to use the technologies responsibly. And the example I use all the time is alcohol, because it's a perfect analogy. It's not whether you choose to enjoy a beverage or not. It's your relationship with the beverage that determines whether it's healthy or not. So if you're, again, enjoying a nice glass of red wine with friends over a dinner party, that's very, very healthy consumption. Okay. If you can't wait to throw off your coat when you run in the door after work because you need that drink, that's not too healthy. The other that we haven't spoken about is epigenetics, meaning the way all of us react to technology is different based on our nerve physiology. Again, the alcohol example is classic. You have, certain genetic families. You find a lot of these in more common in those of Asian heritage, where you have one sip of alcohol and you flush, you feel nauseous. There's no pleasure in this at all. Okay, it's a poison to your system. You have other individuals that, they have a half a glass of wine and they're tipsy and happy. And I think everybody has a friend that can down a whole bottle, and it seems like they're okay. Now, I'm not suggesting you go out and drive, but the way that your system reacts to the identical substance is entirely different. So know that about yourself as well. That some of us can be on technology longer, and it doesn't affect us to the same degree. So watch your own behaviors, and watch for that little bug called denial. If you see, just like alcohol, that your relationship to your screen isn't quite feeling right, or that you really need it, then you want to look at it again. But just to kind of come full circle, it's balance. Please have some chocolate cake, but don't eat 3 chocolate cakes a day.
So if someone recognizes, okay, I've got this imbalance, what recommendations would you have for them to start regaining control of the balance? Where would they start?
Usually, again, this is one of the things that my earlier studies, concretely found. And at the time, again, this would have been around 2012, the sciences, one of the things that really advances the sciences is disagreement. But at that time, every single non-vested heavy hitter, and by non-vested, I mean they didn't have skin in the game, they weren't trying to sell you things, with more mature users, every single individual that was misusing or excessively using screen-based technologies was suffering from some kind of a psychosocial difficulty, period, and then escaping to screens. So essentially look at what's bugging you and why you're escaping to the screen. So it could be a subclinical depression, it could be a subclinical anxiety, all of these things. So be really honest with yourself. And the second, it's very, very simple. Get a hobby. Find other things to occupy yourself. If you're a busy-brained person that just can't sit home alone, or, in terms of the dynamic in your relationship, you need a little something else to fulfill you, get out, join a singing group, take a painting class, join a bridge club, go golfing, join a walking group. As I said, if you have family, reconnect more with family, volunteer, all of the classic things. One of the major crises that I'm seeing now is people have dropped all their hobbies. And that's a big one. And just branching off on that, hobbies do a lot for us in terms of essentially slowing down aging, because they keep the mind and the body active. And one of the biggest fiascos still to this day is how a lot of smaller screen-based games are being promoted to stay off cognitive decline. And it's hogwash. It actually tends to do exactly the opposite. And the reason for that is the brain is only being trained to do what the program or the programmer wants it to do. And the second is, if you're on the screens, you're not doing other things, meaning you're not using your body and you're not using your heart, meaning you're not with other people and you're not physically active. And the trade-off is a negative trade-off.
Oh, that's interesting, because I read some recent research where using technology as part of a physical fitness activity. So the brain was engaged, you were having to get involved in doing strategies and activities, and where the mind and the body and the thought process were all acting at the same time, was actually very effective in developing neuroplasticity and causing the brain to be actively engaged. But it was because the body and the mind were engaged at the same time.
Yeah, read the small print.
Okay.
I obviously haven't read all the studies, but and they're coming out all the time. But when you get to the small print, it tends to say something very, very different, or it just does the same thing as if you were on a treadmill or walking on a beach. The mind and the body have to be engaged, so it might not be doing anything else different than anything else.
Okay.
And again, I've been astounded when you get to the small print. Sometimes stats are twisted, and they actually say the exact opposite. And unfortunately, very, very few people read the elusive language of statistics. So a lot of the headlines that we see on media, it's just what the PR people have thrown at them. Nobody's actually looking at it, looking at what's underneath. And yeah, I could chew your ear off in terms of this type of stuff. But bottom line, be very, very wise consumers.
Okay,
The other, I'm sorry, I think it's really important to go there. We first kind of looked at this with a lot of the Wii games really being promoted, getting kids off the couch. But they, yes, the body gets its exercise, but it has a negative brain effect in that it locks down the vestibular system. So what you'll find is if kids run around in the park, frequently they reach a fatigue point. Now they still might tantrum at things because they're hungry and they don't want to, leave their friends. But we don't have a vestibular lockdown. And so when kids get off Wii, it's the same as if they get off a hardcore computer game or, some of the lighter things, in that they need to reset. And this is why they run around and tantrum. They have to reset the emotional system. the last thing that I think is very, very important here is when they say it's the mind-body engagement. How do they know this? What part of the brain is being used? There's some fascinating research coming out of the University of Waterloo in Canada. I think there are a few other departments now looking at this. Looking at, okay, what areas of the brain are actually engaging? And this was during the Pokemon craze when everybody was overjoyed. It's getting the kids outside. It's pro-social. It's helping us with geolocation skills. All of these magnificent claims are being made. And then they started looking at, okay, what area of the brain is actually being used? And what they found is some individuals were using the caudate nucleus versus others it was hippocampal. Now, caudate nucleus is the search and destroy area of your brain. So you're not learning any geolocation skills at all. In fact, it's what you want for military skills, killing skills,
right.
Versus the hippocampal. You actually are learning mapping and systems, and it's the part of the brain that's going to get you to mom's house when she forgets to pick you up from school. Okay, so again, really look at what areas of the brain are being engaged. And coming back to the alcohol, in terms of how we react differently, the really, really cool thing is some of us are using one area of the brain where others are using a different one. So, when we talk about mind, body, and we throw out all of these fantastic terms and terminology, a lot of it is smoke and no fire. The terms sound really fancy, but it could be nothing, or it could be the exact opposite. So again, be wise consumers. If you're just playing things for fun, go for it. And I don't mean to say don't play these things because they're fun. But again, with the Pokemon, if you're walking into cinder blocks, ignoring your friends, all the other things, disrespecting cemeteries, and, those are pretty big hints that maybe this isn't a good thing. Okay. But if you want to run around the park for half an hour and have some fun, of course, go for it. Okay. But don't tell me that it's good for your brain because it's improving your mapping skills.
Okay.
If anybody wants to go to my website, I wrote a fun article on that, which is 10 things the gaming industry wants you to forget that you learned in research class. And it's all about the red herrings of gaming.
Well, there's a lot of takeaways here that it's like technology isn't necessarily bad.
Nope.
It serves a purpose. That there's no one size fits all, because it really has to do with how it affects you and why you're spending that time on the screen, and what happens when you do spend the time. And the other is what happens when you're not spending the time, and getting a perspective to say, is this interfering with other parts of my life that can be more fulfilling, satisfying, is really important. And that's something that's a question you need to have, a conversation you need to have with yourself or your loved ones to make sure that you do have that balance and that it is in the proper perspective. And that we're not going to eliminate technology, and the amount of information that we're going to get bombarded with is not going to slow down. It's only going to increase. So just be wary of what input that is having on your mind, on your brain, on your emotions, and just be wary, because what you may be fine now, but something can take you down a path fairly quickly, and you say, all right, question yourself, is this where I need to be? So it's a great, not a red flag, but a yellow flag, just to say, hey, be careful, there is some danger here, and you can control it, which is the good thing. And the sooner you catch it, the better, the more control you're going to have. Now, if people want to get more information, and you mentioned your website and also your book, iMind, where should they go to get that information?
I would say my website is the key resource at this point.
Okay.
And you can get in touch with me from there as well. And it's drmariswingle.com. Pretty easy.
Okay. And the book is?
My Mind. Yeah. How cell phones, computers, gaming, and social media are changing our brains, our behavior, and the evolution of our species. Title tells all.
Title tells all, and it is a good read, and it does provide a lot of good insights into kind of what we've kind of evolved into, and also some cautionary tales about what we can do to prevent it from causing disruption in our lives. So, Mark, go ahead.
Sorry. Oh, I was just saying it's within social context as well, which is, I feel, very important. How we got here, and where we're going. And as I said, it's about informed choice. I don't want to preach what people should or shouldn't do, but just to be an informed consumer.
Okay. Well, Mark, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your stories, because I think it's a great message, not just for people over 50, but for our grandkids, nieces, and nephews that also, are impacted by on-screen technology. So thank you so much for being with me today. It's
really been my pleasure. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to Never Too Late for Fitness Radio, hosted by Phil Ferris. To learn more about the guests or resources on our show today, or to listen to past episodes, go to nevertoolateforfitness.com.